Introduction to Azure SQL Managed Identity. Azure SQL Managed Identity is a feature that allows you to authenticate to Azure SQL databases without needing to manage credentials or secrets. This guide will walk you through when to use Azure SQL Managed Identity and how it can benefit your organization. Understanding Managed Identity. A managed identity is a type of identity that is managed by Azure and can be used to authenticate to Azure services. There are two types of managed identities: system-assigned and user-assigned. System-assigned managed identities are created and managed by Azure and are tied to the lifecycle of a specific resource, such as a virtual machine. User-assigned managed identities are created and managed by the user and can be assigned to multiple resources. When to use Azure SQL Managed Identity? You should use Azure SQL Managed Identity in the following scenarios. First, when you need to authenticate to Azure SQL databases from an Azure resource, such as a virtual machine or Azure function. Second, when you need to authenticate to Azure SQL databases without managing credentials or secrets. Third, when you need to rotate credentials or secrets without interrupting service. Benefits of using Azure SQL Managed Identity. Using Azure SQL Managed Identity provides several benefits, including improved security, reduced administrative overhead, and simplified credential management. Managed identities eliminate the need to manage credentials or secrets, which reduces the risk of credential theft or misuse. Additionally, managed identities can be used to authenticate to multiple Azure services, making it easier to manage access to Azure resources. Practical example. For example, suppose you have an Azure function that needs to connect to an Azure SQL database. You can use a managed identity to authenticate to the database without needing to manage credentials or secrets. To do this, you would create a system-assigned managed identity for the Azure function and then grant the managed identity access to the Azure SQL database. Best practices. When using Azure SQL Managed Identity, it is essential to follow best practices to ensure secure and efficient use. First, use system-assigned managed identities whenever possible, as they are tied to the lifecycle of a specific resource and do not require manual management. Second, use user-assigned managed identities when you need to assign a managed identity to multiple resources. Third, use Azure Role-Based Access Control to grant managed identities access to Azure resources. Conclusion. In conclusion, Azure SQL Managed Identity is a powerful feature that can simplify authentication to Azure SQL databases and improve security. By understanding when to use managed identity and following best practices, you can take advantage of the benefits of managed identity and improve the security and efficiency of your Azure resources.